for parents. One parent complained, so we were forbidden. The thing is, it was a rare night of fun for many of us with younger children. No one got drunk, but one parent had to ruin it. So a lot of people, Doug, just don't believe that having your children see you drink responsibly, as Andrew was mentioning, is a bad thing.
I wouldn't say that the same either. I think that all our drinking, all our consumption of drugs should be in a responsible fashion, and if there are children there. But that's not really the point. We're thinking about it at a population base, and there's an enormous amount of harm, and the best ways of reducing the harm to New Zealand. Just imagine if we had half the cost of the $7.85 billion. Let's say we had $4 billion, that could improve the infrastructure of New Zealand. It would be just so wonderful. And we would have a transformation that we've seen with tobacco. We're such a much better country now that we've got that tobacco no longer is seen as a success product like it was 40, 50 years ago. And that's where we've got to get to with alcohol. We don't want to ban it. I mean, I enjoy drinking alcohol. It makes me feel like a wonderful person living in a beautiful world. It distorts, some of the misery of normal life for many people, and I think treats in life are very important. We don't want to get rid of that fun, but I think we need to do a lot more in terms of denormalising alcohol in New Zealand.
Very good. Nice to talk with you. Professor Doug Selman on the panel. The wealth held by 2 people in every 100 has increased twice as fast as the economy's grown. This is a study by the University of Auckland's Tim Hazeldine and Victoria University's Max Rashbrook. It's not brand new, but it's only now been peer-reviewed, and it's in the New Zealand Economic Papers Journal. Those with the big panellists, those with the big money, 1 in every 5,000 people have seen their assets increase 6-fold. Increasingly, there is a level of inheritance. If you have money, you'll make money. Do you both think if you've been born into wealth, you would have no trouble multiplying it?
Yes, having wealth certainly helps you get more of it.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. There was that fascinating study on the front page of the Herald again, actually, the other day about the number of kids from high decile schools that go to university compared with the number of kids from very low decile schools.
Yeah, good example.
The figures were quite eye-opening. And this study, I think, you've got to remember that the rich list is not a scientific piece of research. It's a bit of a finger in the wind, and it probably underestimates, in fact, some of the wealth that there is in this country. So it can't be taken as gospel, but I think it highlights a trend that we know is happening. The top rich people are getting richer in developed countries.
Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah, I think if you've got the assets there, then it's easy to build on them. But likewise, when you move through generations, if those follow-up generations don't have the same drive, work ethic, etc., that the first generation that made that money, it's very easy for them to lose it. You see it quite often in farming, where someone will be a great farmer, they'll build the farm up, and 2 generations later they've got completely useless grandkids that the farm goes on the market.
Anybody you know in particular?
No.
Yeah,
none of my neighbours, no.
It's the farmer's nightmare.
Yeah.
Andrew Hoggard, thank you for your company on the panel today.
No worries.
Maria Slade, very nice to have you make your debut. Come back.
Pleasure.
And we are back tomorrow. Thanks, everybody, and Checkpoint is on the way now.
Mai haere mai o te hotaka o te ahiahi. I'm Alex Perrottet. Great to be joining you for the next month or so. Thanks for joining us. Tonight on Checkpoint, the government announces an extension of our military presence in Iraq. Jane Patterson is standing by to give us the very latest. Scott Dixon makes history, becoming the first driver in half a century to win 5 IndyCar championships. His proud mum Glenys joins us. She says she was a nervous wreck. Cracks in the coalition. Former United Future leader Peter Dunn says the Prime Minister needs to put Winston Peters in the back seat. Mainzeal directors were in the High Court today. They're being sued for millions for its collapse. And the stress of Kaikoura keeps going on. We'll have more on that. More from Hong Kong. Someone is stealing avocados in Bay of Plenty, and there's a spring snowfall in Queenstown. More on that on Checkpoint after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. New Zealand soldiers will stay on in Iraq until June next year. The mandate for the joint training mission with Australia, based in Taji camp, was due to expire in November. That mission started in 2015 as part of the US-led Operation Inherent Resolve and has trained more than 30,000 members of the Iraqi security forces. It involves about 143 New Zealand Defence Force personnel, but that will be reduced to 121 from November. Most personnel are based at Taji camp, but there are also 3 intelligence officers working out of Qatar. The Prime Minister says New Zealand remains committed to helping in the fight against ISIS.
I do want to note, though, we have also decided that the government will review the deployment again in early 2019. That's to assess New Zealand's options for contributing to stability in Iraq beyond June 2019.
Jacinda Ardern. The former Prime Minister Jenny Shipley is among directors accused of mismanaging construction giant Mainzeal before its collapse. Dame Jenny sat in the public gallery at the Auckland High Court while prosecutor Mark O'Brien laid accusations of negligence at the company's board. Mainzeal Property and Construction was one of the country's biggest companies before it went into liquidation in 2013, owing creditors more than $117 million. Mark O'Brien said an undercapitalised balance sheet and systematic governance failures were the reasons behind the company's collapse.
Liabilities significantly exceeded its assets from as early as 2008.
Mark O'Brien said the company had been dangling by a thread of shareholder support just prior to going under, and the directors should have known. Today's spring snowfall has closed roads, disrupted flights and cut power in the lower South Island. The road between Te Anau and Milford Sound is expected to remain closed until late tomorrow due to the number of fallen trees and a high avalanche risk. Meanwhile, the Queenstown Lakes District Council says chains are no longer needed on the Crown Range, but it says motorists should still carry them just in case. Parts of Queenstown, Frankton, Arrowtown, Dalefield and Glenorchy are still without power. Aurora Energy says the extreme weather is hampering crews' ability to find and fix the faults. An Auckland Council employee at the centre of its new pest management strategy has received death threats. Cat activist groups met with the council this afternoon to discuss their opposition to the city's plan to classify any cat without a microchip as a pest. The strategy will be finalised by March next year and means any unmicrochipped cats found in areas the council considers biodiverse will be euthanised. Auckland Councillor Penny Hulse says their principal biosecurity advisor has received several death threats over the controversial plan.
Some of our fringe members of groups or individuals are making these kind of threats to staff, and we all agreed that that was completely unacceptable.
Auckland Councillor Penny Hulse. The chair of Dunedin City Holdings is backing the under-fire lines company Aurora Energy. The Commerce Commission has filed court proceedings against Aurora over poor maintenance of its power poles and cables. The Commission says the council-owned company breached its standards in 2016 and 2017, leading to power outages. The maximum penalty for each breach is $5 million. But chair of the council's subsidiary, Dunedin City Holdings Limited, Graham Crombie, says the Commission's decision is a step forward for Aurora.
Well, I think it's a good positive move to move on to the next step. I mean, we're very happy with the way the new Aurora team are working, and this is just dealing with the historic piece, and the sooner we get that settled, we'll move on, the better.
Graham Crombie says all of the work of Aurora's new leadership team has been positive, and he believes the network is safe. Avocado growers are sleeping in their orchards, patrolling the streets at night and using CCTV to try to protect their fruit after a wave of thefts. The Bay of Plenty growers Robin Hanvey and Maxine Graham have built a 2-metre-high electric fence after being repeatedly targeted by avocado thieves. Mr Hanvey says he was beaten up earlier this year after disturbing 2 men he found on his property.
I told them to get out of the place in unkind words. And then they both talked to me.
At least 40 properties in the Bay of Plenty were targeted by avocado thieves in July alone. The police say some of the thieves are travelling into Bay of Plenty from other regions to steal avocados, which cost up to $7 in shops during the off-season. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport. The New Zealand racing driver Scott Dixon has joined motor racing's elite, winning his 5th IndyCar Championship title in California this afternoon. Dixon is just the second driver to win the championship 5 times and now sits only behind the legendary American driver AJ Foyt, who won 7 IndyCar titles. Dixon finished runner-up in the final race of the season in Sonoma, but he says it's truly a team effort.
It's all about the people, you know, and I'm the lucky one that gets to take it across the line. But you know, I can't thank Emma enough, my wife. She's just been so amazing. It's actually the anniversary of her father's passing today, so it's obviously an emotional time for her and her family. But you know, I can't thank enough everybody. This doesn't come, you know, without a lot of hard work.
Scott Dixon. The Tall Blacks will sing the national anthem only in Māori ahead of their match against Lebanon in Rotorua tonight. FIBA, the sport's international governing body, allows just 1 minute for each team's pre-game ritual. The New Zealand side is also given another minute to perform their haka. The head of Basketball New Zealand says not performing the haka wasn't an option for the team, and the side is now likely to alternate between the English and Māori versions of the national anthem at matches. That's the news.
Listening in.
I don't know why they got you back and you got a thin ear. Let me ask you this. When it goes to Cabinet, to go before the Parliament, what about that sounds like finality?
Listening ahead.
It was, you know, in the style of that TED Talk, it was a bit like, frankly, an iPhone launch without the iPhone.
And listening with scrutiny.
I think, Susie, we can say quite surely that Mr Peters is sitting right there in the passenger seat next to Jacinda Ardern, ready to pull the handbrake on whenever he sees fit.
Listen every weekday morning from 6 to 9 on Morning Report.
Then on 9 to noon, current advice on sun protection is flawed and new research claims we may be too conservative with our slip, slop and slap approach. And after 11, Ngarina Ellis tracks the influence and travel of Māori art around the globe. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy at times with a few showers. Rain developing in Northland tomorrow morning, possibly heavy, spreading elsewhere tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine today. Occasional rain tomorrow. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumere, Nui, Taupoa and Taihepe. Isolated showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning. Taranaki to Wellington, also Wairarapa, cloudy areas, a few showers returning to rain this evening, clearing tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, scattered rain today, heavy about Nelson this evening, and snow down to 500 metres about Canterbury, but it'll be fine tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, rain with heavy falls, easing to showers this evening and clearing tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional rain today with heavy falls and above 300 metres at first. Fine tomorrow, apart from a few showers in Fiordland, and for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
And it's Alex Perrottet joining you. Thank you for joining us, for listening or viewing to this multimedia news program. It has just been announced by the government that New Zealand will stay on in Iraq until June next year, but the number of Defence Force personnel deployed will be reduced by about 20. This country has been part of a joint training mission with Australia since 2015 as part of the international coalition fight against Islamic State. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has just confirmed the extensions to the Iraq deployment, along with decisions on Afghanistan and 3 peacekeeping missions. Our political editor Jane Patterson joins us now from the parliamentary studio. Good evening, Jane.
Good evening.
Earlier in the year, Ron Mark, the Defence Minister, said our role in Iraq may change. Is that detail in the announcement this evening?
Look, there was a very strong signal from Jacinda Ardern that New Zealand's contribution is likely to look very different come June next year. Basically, what the Cabinet have done has given themselves some time to make those longer term decisions. So the mandate agreed to by the previous national government was due to expire in November, but the actual training mission or the training program itself was due to go through until June. So Ms Ardern has said that this government will fulfil that commitment. Of course, course, remember Labor was very critical of the Iraq mission, with then leader Andrew Little questioning the merit or the benefit of training Iraqi forces. Ms Ardern says that this does not equate to mission creep that Labor accused the other government of, but she said it's fulfilling that mission until June. Afghanistan as well, going through to September, and she said both of those contributions, and of course both of those contributions will be reassessed next year. And New Zealand has been in Afghanistan for about 20 years, so I wouldn't take this as any long-term commitment at all to that Iraq deployment in particular.
Yes, our involvement in Iraq, of course, getting some bad press, and now with that independent investigation into our role in Iraq and the revelations or the accusations in that Nikki Hager and John Stevenson book, Hit and Run. Ron Mark has been talking up how, I suppose, this could be a really a long-term commitment. I think he earlier said that Iraq has been munted, that the sort of infrastructure investment in that country would necessitate a long-term investment. How do you see New Zealand First's role in this decision, and can you comment on the Greens too, because Golriz Garraman and others in the Greens have obviously been dead against this?
Well, Ron Mark, I did talk to him about this deployment a couple of weeks ago and asked him how his view had changed in opposition and then as Defence Minister being part of this decision. He said that it's clear New Zealand does have a role in Iraq, that it's really coming to the end probably of the training situation, but that's where New Zealand might move into another role in terms of helping with reconstruction, maybe a peacekeeping role, that sort of thing. So they're clearly also having to work within the context of very important relationships. So all of our Five Eyes partners, all of New Zealand's Five Eyes partners are part of the coalition Operation Inherent Resolve led by the US. So the relationships with US, Australia, who is part of that joint mission, they would have absolutely been part of the considerations when Ron Mark and Winston Peters as Foreign Minister and of course the Prime Minister started making those decisions. Another consideration that Ron Mark talked about was that New Zealand has so many deployments around the world, it's whether this was sustainable in any kind of long-term way. As for the Greens, of course, a confidence and supply partner, they say that they are still adamantly opposed to deploying troops in any kind of role, and of course this mission is in a non-combat role, but even to train, and that they would rather see the money that runs into the tens of millions spent on other things like humanitarian aid.
Yes, indeed. Some of the considerations, of course, that they will be considering, no doubt, maybe opening themselves up for more criticism about making an announcement, but with not so much detail in it. They're buying themselves more time. So just finally, what sort of considerations will they be looking at?
Well, just what I've outlined in terms of those, the coalition relationships with those other countries, the sustainability of it, but also a different approach from a government that does have the Greens in it that, well, not a huge amount of influence, I would have to say, but certainly input. They would wanting to be looking at how that defence money was being spent, how the personnel is being deployed, and of course we're seeing a reduction in numbers. The Defence Force has informed the Cabinet that about 120 rather than about 140 for that Iraq deployment will now be adequate through until June, and 3 other peacekeeping operations in South Sudan, Sinai Peninsula and Golan Heights also extended until 2020.
Thanks very much, Jane. Jane Patterson there, our political editor, with that very fresh announcement by the government that we are to remain in Iraq. More detail coming shortly. It's just coming up to 14 minutes past 5. Jenny Shipley was among the directors of failed construction giant Mainzeal in court today for the start of a trial which could see them forced to pay up to $75 million. The former Prime Minister stands accused, with other former directors, of mismanaging the business when it was on the brink of collapse. Mainzeal was the country's 3rd largest construction firm when it went under in 2013, owing creditors more than $115 million. Matthew Chinnison was at the Auckland High Court.
Dame Jenny Shipley sat pensively at the back of the courtroom while she and the other former directors of Mainzeal were accused of poor governance and of continuing to trade while the company was insolvent. Liquidators are suing former directors for $75 million. Prosecutor Mark O'Brien said the company had been dangling by a thread of shareholder support just prior to going under.
liabilities significantly exceeded its assets from as early as 2008.
Mainzeal Property and Construction used to be one of the country's biggest companies and was involved in delivering some $7.5 billion worth of construction projects across New Zealand. The other company directors accused of poor handling include Sir Paul Collins, Richard Yan, Peter Gom, Clive Tilby and Sue Mao Kwan. Mr O'Brien said the directors were negligent in allowing Mainzeal to continue trading when it had more liabilities than assets.
So generally didn't make much, if any, profit, generally made losses.
He said the directors knew that Mainzeal would need significant funding from its parent company, Rashina Global Real Estate, in order to keep trading. And he said although the funding was entirely voluntary, the directors continued taking on large contracts, assuming Rashina would keep the payments going. Mr O'Brien attributed the company's collapse to an undercapitalised balance sheet and systematic governance failures.
We say MPC's business form was unsustainable, and it did collapse.
The Mainzeal directors are also under fire about a loan the company made to MLG Trading Limited, of which both Dame Jenny and Richard Yan were directors. Mr O'Brien said Mainzeal could have been more proactive in recouping the money it was owed from MLG. He said the directors had a duty of care to their creditors in enforcing loan repayments, and he called their failure to do so negligent. The trial before Justice Francis Cook is set down for 6 weeks. This is Matthew Tunison.
It's 16 minutes past 5. New Zealand's Scott Dixon has joined motor racing's elite, becoming just the second driver ever to win the IndyCar Championship for a 5th time. Dixon has finished second in the final race of the season in Sonoma in California to clinch the 2018 championship, and that goes with the ones he won in 2003, 2008, 2013 and 2015. He went into the race knowing a top 2 finish would see him beat his closest rival, American Alexander Rossi, who eventually finished 7th. Here's our sports editor, Stephen Hewson.
Brian Hunter-Reay wins the Grand Prix of Sonoma, but we witness something that hasn't been done in more than half a century. Scott Dixon is a 5-time IndyCar champion.
Scott Dixon won 3 of this year's 17 IndyCar races. He's just the second driver to win 5 or more championship titles, the other being the legendary American A.J. Foyt, who won 7 IndyCar titles between 1960 and 1979.
Man, this is so awesome. I can't believe it. I can't believe that's actually happened. I don't know, you always doubt these situations so much that it's never going to happen, and I can't thank everybody enough for this. It's so cool.
Dixon admits he thought his dream of a 5th championship title was over in the penultimate round of the competition in Portland earlier this month, when he got caught up in a first lap crash. But he managed to resume racing.
I knew that day that we were going to be lucky coming out of that dust storm and that crash, being hit a few times and being able to pull away. I knew that day was going to be good, but I was just hoping we hadn't used up everything before we got to the last race.
Today's race winner, Ryan Hunter-Reay, paid tribute to Dixon's 5-time championship feat.
What can I say about that guy? 5-time champ, it's unreal. Absolutely amazing what he's done in this era of racing. And to share the track with him is pretty awesome.
But Scott Dixon says he couldn't have achieved the win without a huge amount of support.
It's all about the people, and I'm the lucky one that gets to take it across the line, but I can't thank Emma enough, my wife. She's just been so amazing. It's actually the anniversary of her father's passing today, so it's obviously an emotional time for her and her family, but I can't thank enough everybody. This doesn't come without a lot of hard work.
The victorious Scott Dixon ending that report from our sports editor Stephen Hewson. Meanwhile, Scott's mum Glenys Dixon was watching the race very nervously from her Auckland lounge. We gave her a call just minutes after Scott's victory.
Oh, a nervous wreck, absolute nervous wreck. Pacing around, I was yelling at the kids to be quiet, and I was just a wreck. And of course, when ESPN didn't show the start, I was in tears. I was like, oh my God, what are they doing? Please. I thought they weren't going to show the race. I was just terrified.
You must have had your heart in your mouth. So as your son's driving around the race course, you're pacing around the house.
Yes, I always pace everywhere.
And I guess you're getting used to this. This is his 5th time, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I don't think you ever get used to it, though. It's, really exciting. And, of course, he's, breaking records and things with how many.
And what are the kids saying?
One's doing flips on the floor at the minute. But one daughter's at work and the other daughter's having knee surgery this morning. So, and I've just had shoulder surgery, so we're in the wars.
Well, I'm sure they all know about it, and this news is probably some welcome relief to them and to yourself.
Yes. Yes, oh yes, the daughter that's had the knee surgery this morning, her and I have been texting backwards and forwards ever since she came out of theatre.
And have you had a chance to speak to Scott yet?
No, not yet. No, he's still being interviewed there now. So, okay. Yeah, no.
What are you going to tell him, Glenys?
Just, you're amazing, you know. I mean, I texted him this morning and said, you can do this, and he texted back and he said he'd be trying his hardest and he loved me, so that was all I needed.
Oh, that's great. Hey, gee, it's a tough regime, isn't it? Sometimes we look at these guys racing these cars and it doesn't look all that hard, but the sort of physical toll it takes on them, you see them when they emerge, it must be a very, very intense sort of thing. I mean, you've got to be pretty proud of him.
Oh, way proud, yes, huge. I went up, I was up there for 5 races, the Indy 500 and then 4 after that this year, so yeah. And he did well at all of them, so they were all saying, oh, you can't go home, you've got to stay, you're his lucky charm. But yeah, he still did it, so.
Okay, so when are you going to see him next, Glenys?
Well, he'll be down here next. He's got the movie premiere down here, so he'll be down for that, and then he'll be down here for Christmas, him and Emma and the girls.
Any guesses on how much more he'll do? What's the magic number?
Oh, I think he's got a few more years in him. Yeah, there's no magic number really. Just, you know, as long as he's feeling good about it and the team are feeling good about it, I don't think he'll stop anytime soon.
We hope he doesn't. That's a very proud mum, Glenys Dixon, after her son won 5 IndyCar championships. It's right on 22 minutes past 5. Heavy snow saw central Otago turned into a winter wonderland today, with even ski fields forced to close. Queenstown flights were cancelled or delayed, and there were power outages across the region due to snow-loaded tree branches coming down on lines. And while that meant many were forced to cook at home on their barbecues, children got the day off school to enjoy some impromptu tobogganing. Our Otago Southern reporter Tess Brunton has more.
The snow fell at a fast and furious pace in Queenstown and surrounding areas today, with suburban roads turned into makeshift ski slopes. The bad weather and power outages meant all schools across Queenstown and the Upper Clutha region chose to keep their doors shut, freeing children up to play in the snow. That wasn't great news for Arrowtown Primary School though, which has been forced to postpone its latest show. Principal Chris Bryant says more than 120 Year 3 and 4 students have been preparing to put on the Lion King Kids production.
Tonight was to be our opening night, but we've had to defer that, again, for various reasons associated with the weather, but that's just one of those things, isn't it? You know, is it Hakuna Matata?
Chris Bryant says while students and staff are disappointed, the show will go on, with plans to add another matinee to their schedule. Snow days are a rarity for the school, which only experiences 1 or 2 each year. Speaking from his home in Cadrona, Mr Bryant says the hills surrounding the village are covered in snow.
Well, actually in the Cadrona village itself, we've got snow falling right now. We've had a lot of rain overnight, so it's not really settling on the ground here because it's still quite moist, but there's a fairly steady fall of just snow at the moment.
Cadrona Ski Field, which dubbed the weather the storm of the season, was closed all day after receiving 40 centimetres of snow in 24 hours. Air New Zealand and Jetstar cancelled and delayed dozens of flights to and from Queenstown. Many businesses closed, including Skyline Queenstown and the Queenstown Event Centre. Out of town, Lake Harwest Station farmer Angus Rowley is pleased the bad weather hit now and not later in the month.
We don't start landing until the 1st of October because of events like this. We're a pretty traditional high country station where we have to sort of wait for feeds to start to come away before the ewes have got something good to go onto for lambing.
Met Service meteorologist Andy Bess says the bad weather was caused by a low pressure system moving over the lower South Island. He says the road warnings in place for the Crown Range, Milford Road, Lindis Pass and Haas Pass are expected to expire about 9 o'clock tonight.
As that low pulls away, then warmer air will make it turn to rain over the South Island.
The southwesterlies will eventually begin to ease, and a ridge of high pressure begins to build from the Tasman during the course of tonight and tomorrow. So a fining up for most South Island places.
Meaning that kids in the region will likely be back at school tomorrow. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton Aho.
At 25 minutes past 5, overseas now to a different kind of storm. After lashing the Philippines and Hong Kong, the most powerful storm of the year is now battering southern China with winds of more than 160 kilometres an hour. Authorities in the populous Guangdong province have issued a red alert, telling fishing boats they've been calling them back to port, and work has been suspended on nearly 30,000 construction sites. Earlier, Typhoon Mangkhut killed at least 64 people in the Philippines before wreaking havoc in Macau and Hong Kong. Bridget Burke has more.
The groaning screech of falling metal as howling winds of more than 200 kilometres an hour bring down a crane from a high-rise construction site. Super Typhoon Mangkhut crashed into the coast of China after swirling past Hong Kong and leaving a trail of deadly destruction in the Philippines. Mangkhut is considered to be the strongest to hit the region this year, and it's left carnage in its wake. More than 60 people are dead in the Philippines, mostly in landslides. Mangkhut skirted around 60 miles south of Hong Kong, where the highest number 10 typhoon signal was raised. Ferocious winds battered the city, uprooting trees and smashing windows, shaking high-rise buildings and flooding roads. 70-year-old Hong Kong resident Mrs. Fung said the typhoon was frightening. Yesterday's storm was very strong. Even a person of my weight was about to be blown down by the wind, which made me very scared. Many trees were blown down and windows were smashed. It was very serious this time. This tourist was visiting from Nepal when the typhoon struck.
Oh, yeah, trees are all on the ground, and then building, all grass is broken. Yeah, and then the wind is very loudly, so I'm very scary.
Mangkhut made landfall on China's southern Guangdong province yesterday, forcing the evacuation of 2 million people after barrelling past the gaming centre of Macau. There, casino gambling has been halted, and China's People's Liberation Army is on standby for disaster relief. Ports, oil refineries and industrial plants in the area have been closed, and according to state media, China has ordered 48,000 fishing boats back to the harbour and evacuated offshore oil platform workers. Mangkhut's northwesterly track will then bring heavy rain and winds to the autonomous region of Guangxi before it is expected to weaken to a tropical depression later this week. Meanwhile, in North Carolina, where Hurricane Florence was downgraded first to a tropical storm and then to a tropical depression, authorities warned the worst is yet to come. Florence has claimed at least 16 lives as it continues to ravage the region, flooding cities, endangering communities and leading to hundreds of rescues. Rising waters prompted North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper to warn those who think the storm missed them that danger may still lie ahead, telling the tens of thousands of residents who evacuated to stay put.
If you have evacuated from the coast to a safe place, don't go back now. Even when the evacuation orders are lifted on the coast, it isn't safe right now for you to get there.
Fears of water contamination, landslides, tornadoes and flash floods remain, with dams and bridges in peril as rivers and creeks swell across the state.
It has dumped nearly 2 feet or more of rain in many places. The strongest storm bands are dumping 2 to 3 inches of rain per hour. That's enough to cause flooding in areas that have never flooded before.
I just want my power. I was scared because I didn't know how much more it was gonna rise. But I was praying that it wasn't gonna rise no further, so thank God it didn't.
Mother and daughter, Lisa and Michaela Lloyd, said it was tragic when they saw their Jacksonville trailer park home community completely submerged in water.
Well, I'm happy that family's okay and stuff. We've been keeping in contact with a lot of them, and a house is replaceable, but family isn't, and so it's It's sad because we've lived here for so long. It's sad that if it's gone, it's like gone.
We got to start over.
We got
to start over.
Tragic. That's all. I don't really know.
Yeah.
82-year-old Wilmington, North Carolina resident Yvonne Vinson, one of the lucky ones. Her trailer park home intact and children safe.
This is terrible. This is the worst one I ever seen. I was scared. I was very scared.
Daughter Michelle, who works at McDonald's, also making the best of the situation, despite being unable to get to work for the past week.
My check ain't going to be worth a darn next week, so I don't know what I'm going to do.
More than 1 million homes and businesses are without power in the Carolinas. Florence has already set a North Carolina record for rainfall, exceeding that of 1999's deadly Hurricane Floyd. President Trump is expected to visit the ravaged region this week. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Thanks for joining us. Coming up soon, reports of a metal object being found in bananas now. This is in Australia, of course, where the earlier news was that there's small pins and metal objects in strawberries. Now there's something in a banana. The stress of the Kaikoura earthquake is wreaking more havoc. This time they say shingles cases have increased by 40% due to stress. We'll also get to the Bay of Plenty, where someone has been stealing avocados, forcing growers to take more extreme measures than they otherwise would. We'd love your feedback too. If there's anything that you're finding more interesting than usual and you want to get in touch, we encourage you to do so. 2101 is the text. There's the email, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Of course, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Follow us any way you like and do get in touch. We'll have Nona coming up with business, but first, before all that, Katrina Batten with the news headlines.
New Zealand soldiers will stay in Iraq until June next year instead of coming home in November. The joint training mission with Australia based in Taji camp began in 2015 as part of the US-led Operation Inherent Resolve. The 143 Defence Force personnel have trained more than 30,000 members of the Iraqi security forces. The Prime Minister says that number will be reduced to 121 from November. The former directors of Mainzeal, including the former Prime Minister, Dame Jenny Shitley, have been accused of mismanaging the construction firm before its collapse. One of the country's biggest companies, Mainzeal Property and Construction, went into liquidation in 2013, owing creditors more than $117 million. Prosecutor Mark O'Brien accused the company's board of negligence at the High Court in Auckland, where Dame Jenny sat in the public gallery. Mr O'Brien said the company was dangling by a thread of shareholder support just before it went under, and the directors should have known. The police are urging the public to come forward with information about the case of a Waikato teenager who was shot in the face. The 17-year-old was a passenger in a car when he was shot just before midnight on Friday on Sullivan Road in Horsham Downs near Hamilton. The police say he was taken to Waikato Hospital and is now in a stable condition. The road to Glenorchy will remain closed overnight as crews work to clear trees off the road following heavy snow. A low-pressure system that's dumped snow in parts of the lower South Island is expected to move overnight. Air New Zealand and Jetstar had to cancel and delay dozens of flights to and from Queenstown today. Met Service says the snow warnings in place for the Crown Range, Milford Road, Lindis Pass and Haas Pass will stay in place until about 9 o'clock tonight. Auckland Council's new plan to classify cats without microchips as pests has led to death threats. The new strategy will mean any such cat found in areas the council considers to be biodiverse will be put down. Cat activists met with the council this afternoon to discuss the plan, which will be finalised by March next year. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina. From one side of the desk to the other, Nona Peltier is here for the business news. Good evening to you, Nona.
Good evening to everyone.
Great to have you with us. NZ Tech is frustrated. We know the government backtracked on its appointment of Derek Hanley as the Chief Technology Officer. NZ Tech is frustrated and they also want to appoint their own.
Yeah, it's interesting, and they're wanting to do it without the government support. Can you imagine that?
Have they named their
No, they haven't. In fact, they're having a meeting on Thursday.
Right.
Now, look, this group, NZ Tech, have about 800 organizations as members. It's a large group and growing. It's not just academia, it's government departments, it's companies, businesses like big ones like Fonterra, Air New Zealand. and agricultural as well. There's a lot of interest in what's going on with tech, and because there's such a rapid pace of change, and their frustration is they've been waiting 4 years for a chief technology advisor to give the direction to the industries. And where should we put our priorities? Where should the focus be? And they look to the government to do that. And it's been 4 years, and now they've backtracked. They had actually appointed someone, but, you know, politics got in the way, and Derek Handley, who got the job, it was pulled away from him.
And it came at a financial cost too, didn't it?
Yeah, $100,000 plus. So, yeah. And so now the industry's saying, well, we need to get onto this. And I've asked, like, were you talking to Derek Handley by any chance? And they said, yes, they have been. He's still concerned. He's still interested. He's moved his family here. So, yeah. Anyways, I had a chat with the chief executive of the industry. That's Graham Muller. And he's basically saying, look, it's too long to wait. And this is what he had to say.
There's a certain level of frustration from across the whole tech ecosystem, I think, as we have been working on with the government for a number of years, some sort of establishment of an advisor that understands the pace of technology change and can be trusted and independent and helps the government. I think everyone, including the government, realise how important this is, but for it to take so long for such an important role is quite frustrating.
More pressure there put on the government by Graham Muller, a consultative government that perhaps he thinks should consult a little bit more.
Well, they're going to have the government involved one way or another.
OK, we're moving on. The independent directors of Tilt Renewables have put a price on the value of the electricity generator. But shock horror, it's more than what Mercury and Infratil offered.
Yes, well, Infratil wants to take it over with support of Mercury at 20%. And they've also locked up another 7% held by the Consumer Trust in Tauranga. So overall, they got 77%. So, yeah. The independent directors have come out with a report saying, well, they think that the price should be closer to $3, not $2.30. That's a big difference. In fact, they're saying, well, it should be somewhere between $2.56 and $3.01, exactly $2.79 is the midpoint. The market looked at that and said, okay, so the share price moved up nearly 5% today. That's to $2.41. But it may not be the case that people will get that $2.41 or $2, $3, whichever it is, because the large shareholders, Infratil, said that their offer of $2.30 is fair. They've got 77%. They could just sit there and not buy any more shares. It doesn't really matter what happens at the edges, because when you've got 77% control, you can pretty much do what you like in terms of making decisions for companies.
We've got a time limit on that deal?
Well, I don't know exactly when it is. It's unconditional now. So basically, you can accept or not accept. But in the end, the company Infratil, if they don't get it all, they still have a controlling interest now with 77% locked up. It really wouldn't make any difference whether or not everyone sold their shares. It's an unconditional offer. They're going ahead anyhow.
Speaking of shares and the markets, how are they looking today?
You know, very interesting. There's a lot of worry in the markets today. We've got threats of additional trade war, tariffs going on against China. That saw Asia kind of go, ooh, we don't really like the way that's looking. So this set the markets. It slipped on Monday, but in New Zealand, interestingly, we rose barely 1 point. I mean, you know, not even 1 point, but we're almost steady where we were yesterday on Friday at 92.72. We were at 92.71 on Friday. The dollar is also steady, not moved a bit. And that's interesting because the US dollar has moved up again at 65.5 US cents. So we're holding steady at 91.6 Australian and 50.1 pence. And if you think about it, you know, holding steady in this kind of volatility is quite an interesting position.
Do okay, and small steps. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for that update. Nana Peltier there, our business reporter, with an update on the business news at, what is it, almost coming up to 20 minutes to 6. Aurora Energy's poorly maintained power poles and cables have landed the company in court. The Commerce Commission has filed court proceedings against the Dunedin City Council-owned power company for failing to meet its quality standards. That's in 2016 as well as 2017. Aurora was previously warned for breaching those standards in 2012. Timothy Brown spent the past month investigating Aurora's power pole network, and he filed this report.
The Commerce Commission has launched proceedings in the High Court, saying Aurora's underinvestment in its network, which supplies electricity to more than 88,000 customers in Dunedin, Central Otago and Queenstown Lakes, led to power poles, cables and transformers deteriorating and causing increased power outages. No date is set for the case to be heard. However, under the Commerce Act, the court can impose a maximum penalty of $5 million for each breach, and the company's adherence to its quality standards for this year is also under the microscope. Whistleblower Richard Healy, a former staffer who walked away from the company in 2016 to reveal the state of the network, says the potential penalty is a pittance.
It's an extremely bittersweet experience. I'm more than aware that $10 million is not a drop in the ocean for Aurora. When I left the company, the projected spend for the next 10 years was in the mid-$400 million range.
Mr Healy says he has worked with the Commission during the investigation and, while a financial penalty may seem a counterintuitive punishment for underinvestment, the legislation provides few options.
I've already covered that with the Commerce Commission and I suggested that this was not an appropriate approach. However, their hands are tied by the legislation. What I'd prefer to see is that the government move in with a commissioner, as it's done in the past for other networks, and control the spend of the network.
Neither the Commission nor Aurora would be interviewed for this story, saying it would be inappropriate with the matter before the court. However, in a statement, Aurora's chief executive, Richard Fletcher, says the Commission's decision is important for Aurora's new team, who are focusing on the future. He says this process will resolve what are now historic matters, and the company has undergone extensive transformation in the past year, with the new organisation significantly increasing network investment. Richard Healy paid short shrift to any suggestion the company's issues are historic.
It's straight out of the corporate playbook. Yes, we've made some mistakes, but it's all in the past, and we've got good people now, and we've got the money to fix it.
Outspoken Dunedin councillor Lee Vandervis also dismissed the notion.
All issues in any line system will always be historic. You don't address issues in the future. They're all something that happened in the past. The problem with Aurora is that they've kept happening despite many years of having them being pointed out.
The network is also the subject of an independent review. Mr Vandervis says the upside to the debacle is the quality and value of the network will now be better known.
If it could be properly managed, I think it could actually be a very valuable asset. And as such, I think we should look seriously at selling it because as long as we keep owning it, I believe, will continue to be a liability.
Requests for interviews with Dunedin's Mayor Dave Cull and the city's chief executive, Dr Sue Bidrose, were declined. Checkpoint was also unable to contact Aurora's chairperson, Steve Thompson, but the chairperson of Dunedin City Holdings Limited, Graham Crombie, told Checkpoint he believes today's announcement is positive for Aurora.
Well, I think it's a good positive move to move on to the next step. I mean, we're very happy with the way the new Aurora team are working, and this is just dealing with the historic piece, and the sooner we get that settled, we'll move on, the better.
Just last Thursday, Checkpoint revealed 1/6 of Aurora's power pole network was deemed unsafe in March 2017 and required replacement. Aurora has since been unable to guarantee the safety of its network. But Mr Crombie had this to say.
Look, again, you go back and talk to the Aurora people, all the work that they're doing has been very positive from where they're going, and they're working against their plans. They're taking the independent advice. So that independent report comes out in October. I think their asset management plan, which will reflect that information, is due 19th of October. So, yeah, I've got no reason to think anything else.
So you do believe that the network is safe, just to clarify?
Oh, I've got no reason to think anything else, yeah.
Aurora has said it will agree to be interviewed once the findings of that independent review are made public. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
And of course we all do look forward to that interview with Aurora. Timothy Brown staying on that story as he has for the last month. It's coming up to, well, almost 5:45. Now, what can you do if you purchase a building, your insurance is delayed, and then an earthquake strikes? It turns out not very much. That's the reality for one Kaikoura business owner who's been left with a broken shop and a $50,000 repair bill almost 2 years on from the November 2016 earthquake. This comes, of course, as Kaikoura District Council researchers found many of its residents are still struggling post-quake due to insurance woes, repairs, housing, mental health. The list goes on. And what's worse, post-quake stress has seen shingles cases increase by 40%. Logan Church travelled to Kaikoura with his camera and filed this report.
From the outside, this Kaikoura bookshop appears like any old bookshop should. Quaint, homely and filled with books. But step out the back.
The ceiling all fell through. The chimney, which was the fireplace, which was here, that fell in as well. So we've removed that, taken that out completely. We've had to remove some of the ceiling. This will be replaced as we can afford it.
That is the owner, Jennifer Rush, showing me her broken ceiling and walls. She purchased this building in late 2016 and went straight to the bank in September to organise insurance with IAG. They returned to Jennifer with a list of requirements.
So they needed engineer reports, they needed the age of the building, they needed valuation done, a lot of stuff that I couldn't get done here. We didn't have the resources here in Kaikoura to get it done.
So why couldn't you get all that information?
So one, we don't have a structural engineer here, an actual structural engineer here in Kaikoura. The council were moving at the same time as me, so a lot of their records were boxed up and I couldn't get access, I couldn't have access to those records, which I needed a bit of extra information for the insurance company. Valuers, we don't have a registered valuer here in Kaikoura either. The closest, funnily enough, is in Cheviot.
In short, it was going to take a long time to pull the necessary information together. At the same time, Jennifer had to move everything into the new building, without full insurance, as her lease had expired on her old shop.
I did ask, though, in the interim, if I could insure the building for the mortgage, what we'd paid for the building.
The answer was no. That mortgage is just north of $300,000. But everything was okay until Jennifer and her husband, a volunteer firefighter and excavator, went away on the weekend of the Kaikoura earthquake. They returned to chaos.
The tie rods, which pretty much hold your building or hold the walls together, were hugely damaged. There were thousands of external cracking, some walls had fallen in, the fireplace had broken. I had some issues with plumbing. I've still got one broken toilet. I do have another one.
If you are wondering why EQC didn't help, well, it can't. If you don't have private insurance, you aren't entitled to anything. Jennifer repaired the building enough so she could open again last year. But there is still a $50,000 hole to fix everything else, such as the ceiling, the walls, the plumbing.
The impact of this stress is huge. Yeah.
Do you have $50,000 in your back pocket?
Not at all, not at all.
And she blames IAG for leaving her in this lurch.
I feel extremely let down by these guys, and especially after approaching them, afterwards, there was no empathy, there was no understanding. There was a so-called embargo on the insurance, which was all well and good after an earthquake, but there wasn't when I was applying for an insurance. So
it seems Jennifer is not alone. The Kaikoura District Council is trying to quantify how stressed the community is. A recent survey of 700 households, which is very close to half of the homes in the Kaikoura district, found that many are still struggling. 104 respondents were concerned about insurance, 143 were concerned about their health and well-being, 91 respondents said they didn't have a warm and dry home. The council's community services manager, Susie Haberstock, says things aren't easy for many locals.
Many people say, turn it down and say, oh, come on, we're 1.5 years on, how can you still be stressed? We're over everything. Other people are seriously unwell, they're breaking out in shingles. We're hearing all sorts of stories from the medical centre that shingles is up 40%, which is a sign of serious physical stress manifested in the itchiness that you get when you get the shingles.
The council is establishing a new Rebuilds Navigator role to help struggling residents.
I think our community after about 1.5 to 2 years is feeling very vulnerable and really stretched and very thin, so we need to tread softly and we just need to get in there and we need to help them along. A lot of the time it will just be a conversation. So what is it that you need? You can ask and then they go, oh, I'm not sure which builder to use.
But for Jennifer Rush, all she can do is slowly chip away at that $50,000 repair bill. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ahi nei, ko Logan Church tēnei.
At 10 minutes to 6, we have just received a statement from IAG. That's Jennifer Rush's insurer. Jennifer just featured in that report by Logan Church. The statement says on September the 16th, 2016, IAG sought responses from Jennifer to some initial questions to complete an assessment for her insurance. It says it didn't receive a reply until December the 1st. Now, it says it's sorry that Ms Rush was unable to provide the required information ahead of the Kaikoura earthquake. IAG says it encourages people seeking cover to allow insurers as much time as possible to process their application, particularly in risk-prone areas such as Kaikoura. Tonight, the Auckland region will attempt to count its homeless population for the first time. The 3-hour census of Auckland's rough sleepers will kick off at 9:30 this evening, and it will cover an area from Wellsford in the north to Waiuku in the south. The volunteers doing the count are assembling right now at Eden Park, where our Auckland correspondent Rowan Quinn joins us via live view. Good evening, Rowan.
Hi, Alex.
What's happening there? Describe it for us.
Well, this is the sort of first wave of volunteers that are coming in now. They're the logistics people. They're setting up all the high-vis vests or the clipboards for the 900 volunteers that are going out on this count today. So it's a huge logistical operation. This Eden Park hub is one of 5 right around the region, and the count is going from Wellsford in the north, as you said, way down to the south. And they're trying to really get a picture for the first time of just how big that region-wide homelessness problem is. So what's going to happen is there's going to be small teams going out in every region with one experienced leader at the helm who's used to dealing with homeless people, a community worker, and they'll have some volunteers with them. They'll have a series of about 20 questions to ask the people they come across. There's no obligation for them to take part, but they've tested the questions and they've found that most people who were tested found that they were happy to answer them.
Okay, Rowan, so they'll be going out tonight around 9:30 with their clipboards, and but I can see over your shoulder a bunch of those high-vis vests that they'll be wearing, and obviously asking those questions very delicately to people. They'll bring that information back in. So after that, what do they hope to do with the information?
Well, they want to get a true picture of the homelessness issue, and we know anecdotally and also from community groups working with homeless people that the problem is getting worse in Auckland, and they want to really be able to quantify that so then they can know how to better direct services and how many resources they need to be able to do that. Now, there are sort of challenges to this type of survey that they're doing, which runs from 9:30 tonight till 12:30, very early tomorrow morning. It's called a point-in-time survey. So they just see in those 3 hours how many homeless people there are out and about. Of course, homelessness is very fluid, so they're limited in how much that can tell them. You know, it could be tonight there's more than normal, less than normal, but they've looked at overseas countries that have done this, and they found that this is one of the best ways to get at least some sense of how big the problem is.
Thanks very much, Rowan. Rowan Quinn there, standing there live and giving us the latest from Eden Park. Something novel and hopefully something that we'll be able to do something about, not just to have the information, but the first ever count of Auckland's homeless people from Wellsford to Waiuku, with all the information coming into Eden Park. A 3-hour window that people will be asked about their status as they're found on the streets of Auckland tonight. Don't be surprised if you're out there and get asked a question or two. You might see them walking around with their high-vis jackets and clipboards. It's coming up to 6 minutes to 6. New Zealand supermarkets have stopped importing strawberries grown across the ditch after sewing needles were found in the Australian berries and spreading contamination scare. No needles have been found in the berries sent to New Zealand, but Foodstuffs and Countdown have stopped buying and distributing them, just in case. Now, the scare comes just before strawberries grown in New Zealand start to hit the shelves. Laura Dooney has more.
Strawberries from Queensland with needles secreted inside have now been found in supermarkets in 4 Australian states, prompting consumers to shun the fruit and farmers to dump tons of unwanted produce. But on this side of the Tasman, no one RNZ spoke to seemed too concerned.
I only eat them at Christmas time, really, and I hadn't heard about the publicity about the needles. I try not to buy produce imported from Australia anyway. I try to buy New Zealand produce, so it probably overall won't influence what I do.
No, not really. No, worried. We chop them up anyway, so we don't sort of like tend to eat them whole. So, but yeah, knowing that, yeah, probably be a little bit more cautious. Buy New Zealand strawberries anyway. Don't want Australian strawberries.
I probably wouldn't stop buying, but I would definitely make sure I check before I eat.
No.
You're not worried?
No, I wouldn't worry about it. I'd maybe start checking my strawberries a bit more carefully before I ate them. I mean, Australia's Australia, New Zealand's New Zealand. I would hope if it was a New Zealand grown strawberry, sewing pins would be far from them. Best strawberries are the ones my dad grows.
Your dad's strawberries won't have sewing pins in them?
Not a chance.
But the two big supermarket operators here, Foodstuffs and Woolworths, are concerned, today announcing they've stopped ordering Australian strawberries as a precaution. They say the stock they've got has not been affected and locally grown strawberries will be on sale very soon. The chair of Strawberry Growers New Zealand, Anthony Rakic, says he's never heard of needles and berries before and hopes it never happens here.
We all have our own guidelines and we follow those. Once the fruit's been packed, they must do the same in Australia. I presume they do the same in Australia. I'm not sure what their procedures are. I guess if someone's determined to do it, I'm not sure how. It depends again where it's been done. Has it been done in the field or if it's been done in the store? It's a bit scary.
Mr Rakic says Australian strawberries are only imported until the New Zealand season begins this month. Over in Australia, there was understanding for New Zealand's position. Australian Cabinet Minister Chris Pine told Sky News whoever is responsible for the needles has behaved shockingly and is now affecting trade on both sides of the Tasman.
But I have to say, I can understand why New Zealanders are balking at the strawberry industry here in Australia, because we need to get to the bottom of how widespread this problem is.
The Ministry for Primary Industries says it has been getting regular updates from New Zealand Police and Queensland Health on the contaminated strawberries. Needles were first found in berries grown in Queensland, but now there are fears copycats are putting them in berries in other states. In Australia, 7 brands were affected by the contamination, and people in every state are being warned to be careful before taking a bite. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, call Laura Dooney, TNA.
Thank you, Laura. And in breaking news, Australian media are reporting that Queensland Police have just confirmed that they are investigating a new case of fruit contamination, this time with a metal object found inside a banana. We'll hopefully have more on that later on at 3 minutes to 6. For years, millions of healthy people have been taking a low-dose aspirin based on advice that it can protect against heart disease. But a new study has just turned that advice on its head. The landmark Australian-led study looked at more than 19,000 healthy 70-year-olds and found no benefit. With more, here's the ABC's Penny Timms.
Aspirin is successfully used as a therapy for people at risk of cardiovascular disease. But what about people who have good general health and are prescribed aspirin as a preventative measure against illness? Professor John McNeill of Monash University is a lead researcher of a study that tracked more than 19,000 people in this category across Australia and the United States.
Low-dose aspirin did not appear to increase disability-free survival and secondly, survival. And it also didn't prevent, in any significant fashion, a heart attack or stroke, which is important because that's a reason why many people take aspirin.
The participants were tracked for an average of 4.5 years. Half took 100 micrograms of aspirin each day. The others took a placebo. None of those tracked had ever had a heart attack or a stroke.
We measured it by measuring how long it took for people to remain healthy without having a permanent physical disability or developing dementia. So in other words, how long people spent in a healthy state on each arm of the trial.
But the results for other diseases or conditions are less clear. Professor McNeill says the trial probably needs more time to say conclusively whether or not the long-term use of aspirin reduces a person's chance of getting cancer or dementia, though participants were closely monitored for cognitive decline, with little difference between the two groups. The study also monitored patients' bleeding and found some concerning effects.
We took a lot of care over the measurement of bleeding because older people are more inclined to bleed. Aspirin enhances that effect, and bleeding can range from overt hemorrhage right through to just slow bleeding leading to anemia and everything in between. And we certainly had an increase in hemorrhage in the people taking aspirin.
That's Professor John McNeill ending that report. He's from Monash University. That report from the ABC's Penny Timms. Do get in touch with any feedback you have. There's a few concerns about what people might be finding in their fruit. 2101 is the text. There's Twitter and Facebook and email and all of that. We'll be back with more after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. New Zealand's military training mission in Iraq is being extended to June next year. The mandate for the joint operation with Australia, based in Taji Camp, was due to expire in November. That mission started in 2015 as part of the US-led operation Inherent Resolve. It has trained more than 30,000 members of the Iraqi security forces. About 143 New Zealand Defence Force personnel are currently part of the deployment, but that will be reduced to 121 from November. Most personnel are based at Taji Camp, but there are also 3 intelligence officers working out of Qatar. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the deployment will be reviewed again in early 2019 to assess New Zealand's options to contribute to stability in Iraq beyond next June. She says New Zealand's coalition partners have been informed. A food retailer has been sentenced to 9 months home detention for exploiting his staff. Devinder Singh has been convicted in the Nelson District Court on 25 charges of exploiting 12 Indian workers he employed. The Pizza Hut franchise and food store owner forced employees on student visas to work more than their visas allowed, then underpaid them. One employee was made to work 7 days a week without overtime, while another living in Singh's home was made to cook and clean for him and his family. Others he employed on work visas were only ever paid for 40 hours, despite some working up to 60 hours a week. Immigration New Zealand says the conviction is a result of extensive investigative work. Singh was also sentenced to 200 hours of community service and ordered to pay $150,000 in reparation. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the inquiry into the private security firm Thompson & Clark cannot be extended to cover the police. The State Services Commission is investigating government departments' links to the controversial company, but the police are excluded because of their independence. Amnesty International is calling for the inquiry to be widened to cover them too, but Ms Ardern says that's not possible.
I've been advised that they, again, don't have the ability to take that direct role because of the independence of the police. But I would hope that whatever findings SSC makes will be shared across the public service.
Jacinda Ardern says she understands the police are themselves looking into their use of Thompson & Clark and have been liaising with the State Services Commission. The road to Glenorchy will remain closed overnight as crews work to clear trees off the road following heavy snow. An active low-pressure system causing snow in the lower South Island is expected to move overnight. The bad weather caused Air New Zealand and Jetstar to cancel and delay dozens of flights to and from Queenstown. Met Service meteorologist Andy Best says the road snow warnings in place for the Crown Range, Milford Road, Lindis Pass and Haast Pass are expected to expire about 9 o'clock tonight. He says the weather will begin to improve in the South Island overnight. An investor on trial for insider trading says the warning signs were available for all to see, and he had decided to sell his shares before he received confidential information. Hamish Mark Sansom is the first person to go on trial for using insider information when he traded 15,000 shares for over $50,000. Mr Sampson is giving evidence in his own defence at the High Court in Auckland. He said he had been made redundant by the truck technology company E-Road and had just signed a builder to do work on his home. Mr Sampson says the company released information publicly which showed their launch into the American market wasn't going as well as expected. He said the company acknowledged they were missing their own projections, and that was a big concern and an indication that sales were not going well. The death toll in the Philippines is continuing to climb in the wake of Typhoon Mangkhut. At least 59 people are now reported to have been killed by the storm in the Philippines, with another 2 killed in the Chinese province of Guangdong. Oxfam's Philippines manager, Lot Felizzo, says heavy rain in the Philippines has caused deadly landslides.
Our biggest worry is the Cordillera Administrative Region, which includes the province of Benguet, where landslides have been massive with high numbers of casualties. There, the roads are very much still impassable and power is still out. And so we will need a few more days to be able to bring supplies in there.
Oxfam's Lot Felizzo speaking from the Philippines. Typhoon Mangkhut is now making its way across southern China, where it's said to be weakening as it makes its way inland. A rural Wairarapa school with 8 students has won the right to remain open in 2019. Tuturamuri School, east of Martinborough, was considered for closure after a combination of circumstances led to the school having no students at the end of last year. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says schools can provide an important community hub in rural New Zealand, and that was taken into account in his decision to keep the school open. He says it was clear to him that closing the school would cost children who would have to travel further to school. But he says attracting a suitable teaching principal in 2019 will be crucial to the long-term sustainability of the school. It's almost 6 minutes past 6. Sport, the New Zealand racing driver Scott Dixon is celebrating becoming part of motor racing royalty after winning his 5th IndyCar Series championship in California. Dixon finished second in the final race of the year at Sonoma, having gone into the event knowing a top 2 finish would assure him of the title. He's just the second driver to win 5 IndyCar championships, with only the legendary American driver AJ Foyt, who won 7, ahead of him. The side's inability to cope under pressure is being targeted by new Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua in the wake of their biggest ever loss to England. New Zealand struggled with the physical pressure the Commonwealth Games champions exerted in their opening Quad Series loss in Auckland at the weekend, with England winning comfortably 52-39. Taurua, who's trying to repair and rebuild the side in the wake of the Gold Coast Games, says the problems being identified, it can be fixed.
What jumped out is that last quarter, we weren't smart. We let 6 goals go in the first 5 minutes of that last quarter, and then towards the end, we let 5 goals out. So we didn't have any strategy. We became isolated.
The Silver Ferns play South Africa in Tauranga tomorrow night. The Black Caps all-rounder Colin Munro has guided the Trinbago Knight Riders back to back-to-back Caribbean Premier League 2020 titles. Chasing 148 to beat the Guyana Amazon Warriors, Munro scored an unbeaten 68 off 39 balls as his side reached the target with 8 wickets in hand and 2.5 overs to spare. Munro finished as the tournament's leading run scorer. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the world of the Oxford English Dictionary. Dana Johansson assesses the national netball team's first outing under new coach Nolene Taurua, and Stephen Burgess offers a brief guide in tactical urbanism.
Foraging peoples in East Africa called the Hadza. So these Hadza were introduced to Western toilet seats quite by accident. And the first reaction of these people was not, that's obviously a toilet seat, but rather that's a necklace.
That's Lately with Karen Hay on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy at times with a few showers. Rain developing in Northland tomorrow morning, possibly heavy, spreading elsewhere tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine today. Occasional rain tomorrow. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape. Isolated showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning. Taranaki to Wellington, also Wairarapa, cloudy areas. A few showers turning to rain this evening, clearing tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, scattered rain today. Heavy about Nelson this evening with snow down to 500 metres about Canterbury. Fine tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, rain with heavy falls easing to showers this evening and clearing tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional rain today with heavy falls and above 300 metres at first. Fine tomorrow apart from a few showers in Fiordland. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. It's 9 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katrina, doing a stellar job there. Was there more weather than usual there?
No, there's quite a lot of everything else, though.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. A lot of news, a lot of news.
A lot of news, a lot of weather, a lot of snow if you're down south. It's just coming up to 10 minutes past 6. New Zealand's military troops are to remain in Iraq until June next year. The joint mission with Australia began in 2015 as part of the international fight against Islamic State. Most soldiers are stationed at Camp Taji, where they train Iraqi security forces. It involves about 143 New Zealand Defence Force personnel, but that will be reduced to 121 from November. So I guess the main factoid for you there is there's 22 people leaving. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said at her post-cabinet press conference the government will review the deployment again early next year to assess what might happen after June, and she signalled it could be a very different picture.
We have trained a significant number of security forces. My estimates that I've been given are up to 37,000. But now it's a question of whether or not in the future it might move to, instead of training cadets, to actually training trainers. And of course that would require a much smaller deployment. It might be a reconstruction role, it may be a humanitarian role, but it is a dynamic environment. Our view is though that it's unlikely that it will stay exactly as it is now, but Cabinet is allowing itself the space to reconsider that next year.
Jacinda Ardern, the deployment in Afghanistan has also been extended to September next year alongside 3 smaller peacekeeping missions. The coalition government has put on a show of unity after talk of rocky relations between coalition partners. National says that's all it was, a photo op which failed to paper over the cracks and did nothing to hide the fact that New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters is really the one in control. Jacinda Ardern has come under fire for scheduling media announcements, then pulling back on releasing detail due to last-minute demands from New Zealand First. And yesterday's staged show of unity entitled Our Plan has also been criticised for being short on new detail. Of course, the government says this is business as usual under MMP. Winston Peters says it's the first true MMP government and insisted yesterday that the coalition is not at dysfunction junction. Well, United Future leader and a former leader and Coalition Government Minister Peter Dunn doesn't agree. I asked him a bit earlier in the day how he would describe the past month.
I think it has been a horror month, and I think more importantly it stands in stark contrast to the 6 weeks or so beforehand that Winston Peters was acting Prime Minister. That was pretty calm and smooth against everyone's expectation. I think in a way that's emboldened him to be much stronger in terms of his expectations of the coalition, which is of course contributing to the horror month they've just had.
So you're saying that he's finding it hard to maybe take a back seat. This morning he spoke to Morning Report and said he couldn't confirm which seat in the car he was sitting in. What seat do you think he's in?
I think he's at least in the co-pilot seat, if not on the driver's lap.
Okay, what did you make of the weekend's announcement? It's been described as a TED Talk, as an iPhone launch without the iPhone. What did you make of it?
Look, I thought it was a very impressive performance by the Prime Minister, but it said nothing, and it was aimed not at the general public, but it was aimed at a select audience, the 3 parties in the coalition and their wider supporters. So I thought it was telling in that what it said was really that things are so disjointed and so dysfunctional that we have to put on a show of public unity.
You've had a bit of history here, not just with Mr Peters, but as a minority party that's propped up government on a number of occasions. I want you just to describe for us what's the process like from the coalition agreement to the actual operations of day-to-day government, as you see it happening at the moment with policies that seem to have been agreed beforehand that are always questioned, even at the time of the announcement. Is that how it worked for you?
No, and I think that's the key point, that you have an agreement, you work to implement that agreement, you work with the relevant ministers and officials to give effect to those policies. Then they go through the normal government policy formation process through cabinet committees, the cabinet, etc., then legislation into the House. And they are accepted and agreed by all parties and are progressed as such. What you seem to have at the moment is an additional step, that before they sort of go anywhere after having gone through the formal process, is that there's a further final tick-off by New Zealand First, which might be different to the tick-off they gave earlier on. And that's quite bizarre. You can't work that way. You've got to have good faith, you've got to have no surprises, and you've got to have mutual trust. I think at the moment, none of those things are happening.
You on a couple of occasions were essential in giving a government a majority in the House. Particularly, I guess we'll go back 20 years to 1998, where National fell apart with went their separate way with New Zealand First under Jenny Shipley. Were you emboldened at that stage by, I guess, the power that you wielded to keep that government in power until the election in 1999? I mean, did you have any greater say after that point in time?
Well, yes, in the sense that the vote was far more important. But I was always conscious of the fact that the vote, whether it be in those situations or as a result of an election, is circumstantial. You don't manufacture it. It happens because of the way the Parliament is constructed. Therefore, you cannot seek to overplay your hand. You've got to respect the authority you've been given by whatever means, and you've got to use it judiciously and responsibly. You can't overplay your hand, because the one thing that happens is a certainty. If you are responsible for bringing a government down as a small party, you pay the price. If, on the other hand, you are seen to sort of obstruct them in their actions, you also pay the price. So it's you win if you do, and you lose if you do as well. So you've got to be responsible. You've got to take one step at a time, and you've got to know your place.
How do you characterise the Greens here? Because they're outside cabinet, and if you look at the party leaders, the one person who seems to be missing in all of this is James Shaw. I mean, he might be quietly going about his work, but for a party that has just one fewer seat in Parliament than New Zealand First, what do you make of their profile, their public profile at the moment?
I feel very sorry for the Greens, because they were always Labor's preferred partner. Election circumstances didn't make a Labor-Greens government possible, so they've effectively been just sort of left in the outside room by New Zealand First. I think James Shaw is trying to do his best, but he's hobbled by the fact he's got to support the party-hopping legislation, which is anathema to the Greens. And so I think they're in a very uncomfortable relationship, and I think there'll be a lot of pressure on the Green Party from its own membership sooner rather than later to cut and run.
Finally, Mr Dunn, what's your advice to the Prime Minister handling her deputy moving forward?
Well, the Prime Minister needs to remember she is the Prime Minister. She has the ultimate authority. She's got to be seen to be the head of government as much as she might be the actual head of government. She's got to be seen to be in charge. At the moment, she doesn't look as though she is. So I think she's got to assert her authority very clearly, very loudly, and very publicly. And if that means that Mr Peters packs her sad and sort of walks off into the sunset, so be it. Otherwise, she'll be the one doing that, because he'll have completely overrun her.
Is this government going to run its course?
I think it probably will, but I suspect it will be a pretty dysfunctional relationship long before then, and I think they'll be quite happy to be put out of their misery at election time.
Peter Dunn, former United Future leader and coalition government minister, putting his point of view forward there at 17 minutes past 6. CCTV cameras, 2-metre-high electric fences, neighbourhood watch groups. Avocado growers are resorting to extreme measures to stop thieves stealing their precious fruit, which sell for as much as $7 each in the off-season. Some orchardists in the Western Bay of Plenty are even camping out amongst their trees in a bid to stop ongoing thefts, with one grower even attacked on his own property. Susan Strongman reports.
Robin Hanvey never dreamt that being an avocado grower would be a risky job. But earlier this year, he was knocked to the ground after he approached 2 people on his Kaimai property.
I told them to get out of the place and unkind words. And then they both talked to me.
Robin and his wife, Maxine Graham, began their orchard in 2004, building it up and running a lawn mowing business until last year to supplement their income. The orchard was supposed to be their retirement plan, but they say it's being stolen from under them. They've been targeted by thieves more than 40 times since their avocado trees began fruiting. Their most recent attempt to stop the thefts was to build a 2-metre-high electric fence, but it had been up only a few days when someone cut through the mesh, crawled under the electric wire and stole fruit.
When we built it, we thought, we actually felt quite secure. But that secure feeling went right out the door the morning we went down and saw they'd just cut through the fence.
Ms Graham says she doesn't feel safe in her own property anymore and would never go to the orchard alone after dark.
It takes a real emotional toll on you that every time you go down the orchard, are we going to see? You can see where they've ripped it off, and it's just really galling that we're growing a fruit that takes a whole year to grow, and it just gets to the stage where we can pick it, and then somebody comes in and they're helping themselves.
Senior Sergeant Chris Somerville from Tauranga Police says some of the region's thefts are highly organised. The thieves pass on stolen avocados to a distributor who then has restaurants, stalls and fruit markets waiting to buy the black market fruit. He says those caught stealing avocados can be charged with burglary and face up to 10 years in prison. Buyers also risk facing criminal charges. New Zealand Avocado Chief Executive Jen Schooler says she doesn't know exactly where the black market avocados are going, but she has her suspicions.
We believe most of them are ending up either at farmers markets or in sushi stores or in dairies or fruit sellers that are selling a few fruit at the front of their shop.
As well as building a fence, Ms Graham and Mr Hanvey have joined a neighbourhood watch group, but say there's not much more they can do short of camping out in their orchard.
People have been known to do it. They'll camp out in their orchard. But why? You have to ask yourself, why do I have to do this? This is my property. Why do I have to go to these lengths?
Ms Graham and Mr Hanvey say they're not able to insure their avocado crop, so they just have to absorb any losses and hope that their deterrent measures will have some effect. For Checkpoint, Ko Susan Strongman-Aho.
It's 6:20. The Supreme Court has upheld an appeal by an Auckland iwi to stake their rights within Auckland Central in a long-running treaty dispute. In a decision released today, the Supreme Court said Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei can now take its case against the Crown to the High Court. However, it was only a part victory, with the treaty settlement Ngāti Whātua was protesting won't be allowed to be challenged. Te Manukorohi reporter John Boynton has more.
A Supreme Court hearing in May was the final chance for Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei to have its case heard at the High Court over its land rights in central Auckland. Previous attempts to have its case heard failed at both the High Court and the Court of Appeal. Now the Auckland iwi can argue its case, and its spokesperson Ngārimu Blair welcomes the Supreme Court's decision.
They have convincingly stated that we should have access to the High Court, which has been blocked now for a few years by the Crown, and now we can have access to it to lay our claims to Auckland and hear other challenges to central Auckland.
Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei objected to the proposed transfer of commercial properties in central Auckland to Ngāti Pawa and Marutuahu as part of their treaty settlement packages. The Supreme Court says they can't challenge the proposed decision to transfer the specified properties. However, Mr Blair says there's been serious questions raised about the transfer process.
So we are encouraged by that, particularly in the case that we can now actually challenge these offers by the Crown in the High Court.
And Mr Blair says the Crown and Marutuahu will be foolish not to take the Supreme Court's ruling seriously.
We are calling on the Minister, Andrew Little, now to take heed of the Supreme Court ruling and the concerns that have come out of the Supreme Court and come back to the table with us, and Marutuahu to come back to the table with us. Our door has always been open at the Marae Ōrākei.
Treaty Negotiations Minister Andrew Little wouldn't comment on the Supreme Court's decision. However, former Treaty Negotiation Minister Chris Finlayson says he doesn't know how far Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei can take its case with a new judgment.
I describe it as an interesting judgment that doesn't affect the particular properties, and if Ngāti Whātua have any clues, they will stop this sort of attitude that they have hegemony in central Auckland and recognise that there are bona fide overlapping claims that the Crown has to deal with.
The Crown and the Marutuahu Collective, a group of 5 iwi, initialled a collective redress deed in July, which is currently in the process of being ratified by the collective's iwi members. The Supreme Court's decision still allows the passage of the Marutuahu Collective Treaty Settlement to continue. For the Marutuahu Collective Chairman Paul Majuri, the Supreme Court decision doesn't change the settlement process.
For us, we're proceeding with the Marutuahu settlement that's been initialled. We're going through ratification, and if all goes well, our people will support the settlement and it'll then proceed to legislation.
Mr Majuri does see an opportunity to reach an agreement with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei without more litigation.
So there is that potential substantial. If what has been sought, as has previously been said by Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, is a veto, in their worldview, that they're the only tribe with mana whenua ahi ka in central Auckland, then that won't be a basis for agreement.
Ngārimu Blair says Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei will make a decision about its potential legal proceedings in the next few days. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
It's 24.5 minutes past 6 to finish with this evening. Death threats have been levelled against an Auckland Council staffer at the helm of its new pest management strategy. Animal rights activists met the council this afternoon to air their concerns. This is about the city's plan to classify any cat without a microchip as a pest. The plan, due to be finalised by March next year, means any cat without a microchip found in council-branded biodiverse areas will be euthanised. Annika Smith reports.
The beloved feline friend is at the centre of a stoush between cat advocacy groups and the Auckland Council. Councillors Penny Hulse and Kathy Casey met interest groups, including the SPCA and Paul Justice, this afternoon following death threats. Penny Hulse stresses the threats were made by fringe elements, not the interest groups. Those threats, she says, were made against Auckland Council's principal biosecurity advisor using social media and official council channels.
They've actually been really good. They've been helpful and they've been supportive. This is in no way linking them to any of that negative behaviour. We did, however, touch on the fact that some of our fringe members of groups or individuals are making these kind of threats to staff, and we all agreed that that was completely unacceptable.
Ms Hulse says the threats have been reported to the police and the staffer is receiving support. She says when it comes to pets, the council felt it needed to meet interest groups.
We weren't under any legal obligation to go through a formal submission process, but it just seemed to me that, when you're dealing with something that is as personal and as passionately held as people's pets, that it was a really important thing to do.
Feral cats are already classified as pests under the Council's existing regional pest management strategy, but the new one will mean any unmicrochipped cat found at sites of ecological significance will be considered a pest. These cats will be the targets of traps and may be euthanised, like rats and possums. Anne Batley-Burton, president of the New Zealand Cat Foundation, says the council plan puts pets at risk.
If that was the case, you would end up with people's pets getting killed. You would end up with the poor strays being wiped out, and that would be a terrible situation. These are all sentient beings and their lives should not be taken lightly.
Andrea Midgen, Auckland SPCA's chief executive, says the plan is just too broad. She says the public needs time to transition.
They've mapped and said that these areas are ecologically sensitive, but they haven't actually got down to whether they're ecologically sensitive for flora or fauna or both. And let's target the ones that are really critical, maybe like the regional parks, rather than the bush reserve that's at the back of, a residential area.
Miss Batley-Burton says she knows nothing about those sending death threats. She says this afternoon's meeting ended with councillors asking advocacy groups to use their influence to stop the culprits.
I find that rather strange, actually, because I can't imagine anyone doing that, but that's what she said. And if that's the truth, obviously these people need to be stopped.
The council says the proposed plan doesn't involve compulsory microchipping, but says it's part of being a responsible pet owner. It says where cat control is carried out near housing, it will communicate with the local community to ensure cat owners have reasonable time to ensure their companions are microchipped. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Annika Smith aho.
Thanks for getting in touch with all your feedback this evening. One person has got in touch on the text, Alan. He says Peter Dunn is not even at the bus stop, let alone in the vehicle. I think this man has had his day. Thanks for that feedback, Alan. Some other people lending their voice to that view. They're questioning why we go to Peter Dunn on that topic. Well, we thought that he had fairly singular experience in dealing with coalition and governments over the years, and some people saying there's a bit of relevance deprivation syndrome there. Well, we thought he certainly could share a little bit of his expertise with us. That's all we've got time for this morning with Checkpoint. Just to let you know, there's been some people saying, who is this new presenter? I'm Alex Perrottet. I've been with RNZ for a few years and I've now joined the Checkpoint team full time. I will be hosting this program for the next month until Lisa Owen joins us as the new presenter. I'll be producing and reporting after that. But don't despair, the whole team is here. Pip, Catherine, Bridget, Zach, Logan and Calvin. It all remains the same. Thank you for tuning in on the radio and watching online, or however you've chosen to connect with us. Catch up on all our stories, of course, rnz.co.nz/checkpoint, or on our Facebook page. Until tomorrow, have a great night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. New Zealand's military training mission at Camp Taji in Iraq will be extended from November until June next year. More than 1,400 households and businesses in and around Queenstown are spending the night without power. The former Prime Minister, Dame Jenny Shipley, is among directors accused of mismanaging construction giant Mainzeal before its collapse. A Nelson Pizza Hut owner, Devinder Singh, has been sentenced at the Nelson District Court to 9 months home detention for exploiting 12 staff on work visas. And Tuturamuri School in rural Wairarapa, which has 8 students, has won the right to remain open in 2019. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Like they say, it starts with words. Words lead to story, story leads to storytelling, storytelling leads to listening, listening to stories is the gateway path to